Hi, I'm Dennis Phillips, and welcome to Everyday Reloading and Shooting. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about how to get started reloading. If you're new to reloading and you've never done that before, or you've had just a little bit of experience, this is the right place for you to be. The first thing you're going to need is information. And there's a lot of sources out there. Some good, not so good. You can get that through reloading manuals. You can find a lot of information online through the manufacturer's websites or through apps that those manufacturers provide, or through YouTube. There's a tremendous amount of information on YouTube on reloading, different aspects of reloading. And what you'll find out is that reloading is a series of processes. There is a process to reloading, but it's a series of a whole other set of processes, like prepping your brass, cleaning your brass, annealing your brass, how to seat your bullets, how to dispense powder, how to weigh powder. There are processes to all of these, and we'll talk about those and how to get started. So the first thing you're going to need is information. Again, YouTube is a really good source. Here are some channels that I've found helpful. You're going to be learning a lot as you begin your journey, and you're going to need a way to record that information. So I'm going to recommend that you have some sort of notebook that you can use as a journal for recording all of this information. You're going to be shopping online for equipment. You're going to be looking at prices. You're going to be looking at different brands, different manufacturers, different types of equipment for the various processes. And so having this book will give you a place to write all this information down and keep it at your fingertips. Yeah, you can save it online. You can save it to your favorites or whatever. There's no substitute in my mind for having that in print to refer back to. I recommend the Mead 5-star graph ruled notebook. I have a college sized composition book, which is graph rule, which I'm using now. Once those pages are filled up, I'll be switching over to the Mead because it's a larger book and it gives you more room to write. The thing I like about the graph paper is you have vertical lines, so you can have straight columns. If you're recording bullets that you've reloaded, you can have a column for the number of rounds, the type of round, the powder, the charge weight, the type of case, the primer, and so forth. And so you'll want a book to write all of this down in. And you'll be referring back to this later. You can have sections in this book. You can have a section for just information, shopping information. You can have a section for rounds that you've reloaded. You can have a section for recording things like when you're doing a seating depth test, for example. All of this can be written down. Another thing you're going to need is a space to do your reloading in. I recommend that be a dedicated space that's dedicated only to your reloading, because you're going to have to set up a press. You're going to have shelves or cabinets to keep your supplies in. And you're going to need a bench. You're going to need a reloading bench like you see behind me here. That's where you mount your press or presses to. You can also mount your powder dispensers there. But you're definitely going to need a reloading bench to do your work on. So again, this needs to be a dedicated space, not something like a spare bedroom. If that's all you do in that spare bedroom, that's fine. Or if you've got a corner or a long wall where you can set up your equipment and leave it, because there's so much there, you can't get it out and put it away, get it out, put it away. There's too much involved there. So you need a dedicated space. You're going to need information on load development. You're going to need reloading manuals like the Hornady reloading manual here, or the Lyman. There's a number of them out there. So get more than one. Get multiple reloading manuals, because sometimes you can cross-reference data between manuals and check one against another. Again, there's online information like carrier websites and apps. One of the things you're going to have when you're reloading are the components that you'll need. You're going to have brass, primers, powder, and bullets. You have to have all four of those in order to be able to reload. If you don't have those, you can't make a bullet. As far as components, some ranges will allow you to pick up your own brass to reload, but they won't allow you to pick up brass that others have left behind because they sell that to recyclers. Other ranges will allow you to pick up brass that others have left behind. As far as other components like primers, powder, and bullets, a lot of that can be found at your big box stores like Bass Pro, Academy Sports, or Cabela's, or maybe even your local gun store. And there are online sources as well. But be aware that if you purchase items online, you'll not only pay a shipping charge, you'll also pay a hazmat fee for shipping powder and primers, and that could be as much as $25 in fees just to ship you a box of primers that cost $100, and then you add the shipping on top of that. So if you can find those products locally, you're well off to do that. But some sources that I've used are Natchez Shooter Supply, Midway USA, AmmoSeek, and others. You're going to have a means of handling that brass and those bullets. You're going to need loading blocks. You might use an empty packaging tray that came with a package of bullets that you bought. You're going to need various containers for organizing and separating the components and the brass and the bullets. One of the steps in this process will be, say you've come home from the range and you've got a bag full of brass that you're ready to reload. One of the things that you're going to need to do is to anneal that brass. Annealing actually softens the brass and it prolongs the life of your brass. And there are different types of annealing. You could use induction annealing, where it uses an electrical current to heat the brass up to the proper temperature. Or you could do flame annealing. There are different types of systems for flame annealing. There are automated systems where you just dump the brass in the hopper and it does the rest of the work for you. What I use is a plumber's torch and this setup right here, and that allows me to anneal my brass. And there are a lot of YouTube videos out there on brass annealing, but that will prolong the life of your brass. So that's something that you'll need to learn about. You're going to have to clean that brass. I clean mine after it's annealed. Some people clean theirs before it's annealed because they want to see the results of that annealing on the brass. When you anneal brass, that brass becomes discolored around the neck and case mouth. There are different ways to clean your brass. You can do a wet tumbling or you can do a dry tumbling on that brass. If you use a wet tumbling, you'll probably want to use some steel pins, some stainless steel pins that you'll put in there with that brass so that as it tumbles, those pins get inside of the brass and they clean the brass thoroughly. Even the primer pocket gets cleaned. And that's one of the steps in the process, is to make sure the primer pocket is clean. But if you wet tumble with steel pins, you've taken care of that step already. You can dry tumble using a media. There are different types of media available. You can use corn cob media, which is just ground up corn cobs, or ground up walnut shells. Some people use lizard litter that you get at the pet store if they have a pet iguana. You can use a rotary tumbler, or you can use a vibrating or vibratory tumbler. With a rotary tumbler, you put the brass and the media in there and it just rotates, and you let that run for a few hours or even overnight, and it gets the brass really clean. After the brass is clean, you're going to have to be able to separate it from that media, because if you're if you're wet tumbling and you've got steel pins, you've got to separate the brass from the steel pins because you'll reuse those steel pins later, and there's all kinds of pins inside the brass. So for that, you could use a screen separator where you just dump the brass onto this really fine screen, and the pins fall out and they stay on the screen and you remove the brass. Or you can use a rotating media tumbler like the Frankfurt Arsenal media separator that I use. Either one will do the job. If you're dry tumbling, you've got to get that media out of the inside of your cases and out of the primer pockets. So this media separator will do that for you. Once your brass is cleaned and annealed, then you have to prep the brass. Once that brass is fired inside of a rifle, that brass expands because of the internal pressure. And when you reload it, you have to resize that back down to its original factory size. And in order to do that, you're going to have to place that brass into the die and pull the lever and force it. Your brass has to be lubricated before you begin working with it in your dies. Otherwise, you could have a case that would get stuck inside that die because you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on that brass case as you put it through the die and squeeze it back down to its original factory dimension. There are different ways to lubricate it. What I use is a mixture of lanolin and alcohol, which I mix up on a 10-to-1 ratio. So I have or 9-to-1, I have 9 parts of ethyl alcohol, which is 99.5% alcohol, not isopropyl, not 70%, because the other 30% is water. But you want pure alcohol, at least 99.5%. You mix it with that lanolin, and then you spray that onto your cases, and you use a Q-tip to lube the inside of your case mouth. And then the alcohol evaporates and it leaves that thin coating of lanolin behind. And that works very well. It's very inexpensive, and a little bit goes a long way. There are also various manufactured products, like you could have the Hornady One Shot, which is a spray-on lubricant in an aerosol can. Lyman makes a lubricant, which I have not had good success with. I do not recommend that product. I've had cases that have gotten stuck using the Lyman lubricant, and I've had to disassemble my die to remove that case. There's also RCBS case lube, and there's other manufacturers as well that make different types of case lube. You can put that gooey lube on a foam pad, and you can roll your cases on that pad to lubricate them. One guy on one of the forums that I participate on said he uses STP, motor oil treatment. So then the next step is you're going to have to resize that brass, and for that you're going to have a reloading press, and that's going to be the centerpiece of your reloading operation, is that press. Now there are different types of presses. They have what's called a single stage press, which is what I have here, which is my Lee press. Other manufacturers make those single stage presses as well, and what that means is you insert the case into the case holder, you pull the lever, and you size one piece of brass, and you complete one operation. Later, you can use that to seat the bullet. You seat it in there, you put the bullet on top of the case, you pull the lever, and it seats the bullet. Next step, you can crimp. You can put a crimp die in there, you can put the bullet back in place, pull the lever one time, and it crimps that case. So that's called a single stage press, where each pull of the lever performs one process. There are also progressive reloading presses, which are presses that have multiple dies in them, and every pull of the lever performs one operation, but it rotates that base to where it brings another case around. So one pull of the lever may dispense powder, may resize the case. The next pull of the lever could prime it. The next pull of the lever could drop the powder. The next pull of the lever could seat the bullet. And so for someone who's a high volume shooter, a progressive press would probably be good. If you're shooting 50 to 100 rounds a week, or maybe 150 even, a single stage press would probably meet your needs. For any of these presses, you're going to have dies to perform certain functions. You're going to have a sizing die which compresses that case back down to its original factory size. It could be a standard full-length sizing die. Some people use something called a small base die, which actually oversizes a case a little bit more, and that would be like if you're shooting through an AR-15 or some type of semi-auto, and you need for those cases to fly in and fly out of that chamber smoothly with no restriction, and you want to make sure that those cases are really squeezed down to fit that chamber. A small base sizing die would work for that. Some shooters will use a neck sizing only die, assuming that if they fired a piece of brass in their rifle, then that brass has been fire formed to fit their chamber. So that brass should go back into their chamber without having to be resized, but the neck also expands, and you can't see the bullet in an expanded neck because the bullet would be loose. So you have to squeeze that neck back down to its factory size in order for there to be enough tension to hold the bullet. After your cases have been sized, you're going to have to trim those to length. For each caliber that you load, there's going to be a specified length. Now, this would not apply so much to shot shell or pistol loading, but definitely for rifle reloading, you're going to have to trim those cases back, because when that case is fired inside of that chamber, that case is going to expand to fill that chamber, and that case is actually going to grow and become a little bit longer. And so you have to make sure that the case is trimmed to the proper length. Now, you can use a handheld trimmer like the one you see here, using a gauge and a cutting head, and you put that into a drill, and that gauge makes sure that it's trimmed to the proper length. There are also manual trimming tools that have a hand crank, or there are automated trimmers too. One that you could fit in a drill or a drill press, like the one you see here. This is what I use. This is the Little Crow Gunworks World Finest Trimmer 2. I've got that set up for trimming 223, so after I've sized mine, I just run all of my cases through there, and some of them wouldn't have to be trimmed, but I like for them all to be the same length, so I run all of my cases through that trimmer. There are also case prep centers that you can buy that have the trimmer built into them. So how do you know if the cases are the proper length? You're going to have some way of measuring those. And so a digital caliper or a mechanical caliper would work very well for that. These are not terribly expensive. You can get them, you can get a cheap one for probably under $20, or you can get a really good one for under $50, or you can spend over $100 to get one that's super precise. But I found that the inexpensive ones work just as well. Part of the case prep process is going to be deburring and chamfering those cases, because once you run those cases through the trimmer, that case mouth is going to be squared off on the top, like you see in this picture here. And so in order to prep that to receive a bullet and to chamber properly in your rifle, you're going to have to chamfer the inside edge of that piece of brass to remove any loose pieces of brass, and you're going to have to deburr it to bevel that down on the outside. You actually bevel the case mouth on the inside and the outside, and it helps it to chamber, and it helps the bullet to seat as well. And so for that, there are handheld tools that you can use for that, like the one you see here, or you can purchase a case prep center like this Frankfurt Arsenal. It's probably under $120 now. And then there are other tools for things like crimp removal. If you're reloading military brass, either 308 or 556, those brass have a crimp. The primer is crimped into place so that there's no danger of that backing out while it's being fired. Well, you're going to have to remove that crimp, and so there's going to be a crimp removal tool that you'll need to use either in your case prep center or a handheld crimp removal tool. I can promise you that your hands are going to get sore after a while working with this brass if you're having to do a lot of crimp removal. So it's probably good to have some type of tool for that. I've heard some people say that they use a Phillips head screwdriver and they just put that in there and they spin that and that deburrs it. Well, that's fine. There's also a swagging tool, which is a handheld operated tool with a lever on it that you press in there and it actually spreads that crimp out so that it will receive a primer. Part of the reloading process is that you're going to have to insert primers. Once your brass is cleaned, annealed, prepped, and ready to reload, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to seat a primer into that piece of brass. Most presses usually have some sort of function where you can seat the primer into the brass, and you have to do that one at a time. You can also purchase handheld priming tools like the Frankfurt Arsenal handheld primer here that I use. There are also bench-mounted priming tools that you can use. The progressive presses have a priming function built into those. After the cases are primed, you're going to have to measure and dispense your powder. As far as measuring the powder, you're going to have to do that by weight. For that, you would need some type of scale to weigh the powder on, either a digital scale or a beam scale like the one you see here. There are also auto powder droppers that you can get that actually will dispense and weigh out the charge at the same time. Those are a little bit more expensive, so I've let Santa Claus know that that's what I want, and so that's on my Christmas list, and so hopefully Christmas morning that's what I'll find under the tree. If you're using a beam scale or a digital scale and you want to do precision loading, then you're going to have a powder trickler. And how that works is there's a little reservoir that holds the powder, and there's a little tube with a hole in it, and you turn the knob on that tube and powder enters that hole in the reservoir in the tube, and it travels down that tube, and you can trickle just as much as a single granule of powder until that scale, until it gets up to the proper charge weight, and you have a funnel and you drop it into your case. Then you're going to have to seat your bullet. So for that, you'll need a bullet seating die. There are different ones. There are some that have a micrometer built into it so that you can measure your seating depth in thousandths of an inch. So you'll know that it's always exactly right. Bullet crimping, if you're shooting a semi-automatic, then you're going to need to make sure that you crimp your rounds, because that aids in feeding, because it takes the case mouth and it crimps it in just a little bit on that bullet. And so that's going to assist the automatic feeding into your chamber. It will assure that that case has a good grip on that bullet so that if it sticks on the ramp, it doesn't push the bullet inside of the case and cause a jam. You're going to need a way to label and transport your rounds once they're reloaded. For labeling, I'll use a Sharpie, and I have some blue tape and I have some yellow tape, and I'll use a Sharpie to write on those. You can use Ziploc baggies. Some people have a system where they use different colors of nail polish, and so they may put just a little bit of nail polish on the case to identify what round that is. Or you can get a plastic cartridge case like this, or maybe even something like the original case that the ammo came in when you bought it at the store. In any event, those are the processes and what you're going to need to get started reloading. Again, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there. There are a lot of forums. If you're on social media like Facebook, there's a tremendous number of forums out there where you can go out and you can ask a question, and within a couple of hours, you'll have 20 or 30 people responding to you with answers. If you've got a question about a particular powder or a particular load, or something to do with your primers aren't seating properly, or your cases are getting stuck frequently, you can go out on these forums and you can ask a question, and you can get a lot of good, helpful information. Anyway, there you go. Hopefully there's enough information here to help you get started. I wish you the very best of success in your reloading venture. And please be sure and drop a comment below and let me know how it goes. If you found this video helpful, or if there's other information that you would like to share or something that you would like to see in the future, leave a comment below and let me know. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. As always, I hope you will like and share this video with your friends, and please remember to subscribe. Thanks for watching.